I was also in charge of this saturation analysis for all of Uber, trying to figure out how penetrated were we in our target markets. I basically pitched to the CMO, hey, let's run an incrementality test on Facebook, like the entire thing. And this is just for acquisition in the US. We ran a 3-month acquisition, an incrementality test, and it came back that Facebook was virtually non-incremental. And then we turned it off and gave back Uber about 30 million a year. So
Shit.
yeah.
What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Sundar Swaminathan, author of the Experimental newsletter and part-time marketing and data science advisor. Sundar started his career as a software developer at Bloomberg before managing $19 trillion at the US Treasury as a debt manager. He pivoted to growth marketing and data science consulting, where he worked with DirecTV and an edtech AI startup. He then made the mega move to Uber, where he spent 5 years building brand, performance, and lifecycle marketing data science teams. He moved over to a travel tech startup after that and helped them go from 0 to 100K MRR. And today, Sundar is a marketing and data science advisor. He helps B2C founders and marketers on the side. He's also got an upcoming podcast that he's been working on, and he's got an awesome newsletter where he shares frameworks, how-to guides to help B2C marketers. Sundar, thanks so much for your time today, man. Pumped to chat.
Yeah, Phil, thank you for having me. Really excited to be a part of this.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Knack. I have the amazing pleasure of chatting with some of the greatest minds in marketing operations, but you'd be shocked at how many of them have the same issues when it comes to their campaign creation process. They're dealing with things like scaling, personalization, keeping assets on brand, render testing emails, working in rigid templates, and worst of all, having to hand code emails. But many of the leaders in the space are using Knack to eliminate these headaches. Knack is a no-code email and landing page creation platform that covers initial campaign requests right until the sync to your marketing automation platform. Knack improves the whole campaign creation process by bringing the building, optimization, testing, collaboration, and also translation functions all in a single spot. So you don't have to jump around and coordinate feedback between a bunch of different people or wait on developers for very simple edits. Because at the end of the day, marketing ops folks want to focus on process and efficiency. Marketers want to focus on creativity, and Knack makes sure you get both and then some. Check them out at knack.com. That's Knak, and tell them we sent you. I wanted to start by maybe unpacking one of my favorite articles that you wrote. So it's you titled it 8 Startup Marketing Lessons from 5 Years at Uber. And my favorite quote in there is your Mike Tyson version of everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And for marketing, that version is everybody thinks their campaign is great until they run an incrementality test. Maybe you can share, we can start with like you sharing one experiment or a couple experiments that come to mind when you look back on the most surprising outcomes from 5 years of experiments at Uber.
Yeah. So I think the biggest one that I would point out is we were running Facebook or, Meta. That was our staple, performance marketing channel. And basically I was the performance marketing analyst for the US and Canada. So I was the lead, and we had gone into basically a series of weekly meetings and kind of really looked at our CAC, and our CAC was just swinging like 10-20% week on week, which is like pretty unstable. It shouldn't swing that much. And so what we were observing was like we were spending the same amount. So our spend is the same. But our signups were just all over the place. And so basically I was like, hey, let me go away for a couple of days. Let me take a look at it. Looked at the data and basically figured out that Facebook was completely non-incremental. Just from the data perspective, it looked like it was non-incremental. And I was also in charge of this saturation analysis for all of Uber, trying to figure out how penetrated were we in our target markets. And the answer was, this was 8 years after Uber launched. Like, we were fairly well known. Anybody that wasn't using Uber, they weren't using us because they didn't like us, right?
Yeah,
so
they had bikes or they were walking more.
Or they just liked lifts, right? To be honest, that was the other big one. But yeah, right. We had a lot of substitutes. So in these like major urban cities, like there's no reason for someone not to sign up for us. So when you look at that, and you look at the data, then as saying her CACs are swinging wildly, I basically pitched to the CMO with the blessing of my like manager, and I was like, hey, let's run an incrementality test on Facebook, like the entire thing. And this is just for acquisition in the US. We ran a
Mm.
3-month acquisition, an incrementality test, and it came back that Facebook was virtually non-incremental. I mean, it was
Mm.
just like at that point, like no one had thought about it, no one had really like explored what would happen. And I love that we were able to do that, and no one like batted an eye. They were like, "This is what the data says. Let's go try it out." Ran it for 3 months, and then we turned it off and gave back Uber about 30 million a year. So
Shit.
yeah, and which a lot of people will be like, that's not a lot, but it's just again on one channel in one country. So
Mm.
imagine that sort of strategy then replicating across the globe.
Right.
The impact starts to add up.
Okay. Like a
Yeah.
lot of people do this like test with paid ads where they'll shut it off for 1 month and then they'll see and compare it to like when they weren't shutting it off, but you set this up as an incrementality test. So you had a control group and a treatment group in the US. Folks were getting paid ads in the treatment group, and the control groups, like folks were not getting ads at all. Like walk me through the setup there. Like how did you put that together?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm trying to remember if on Facebook you could do that in itself. Like I think there's it's just a split cell test, right? An
Okay.
incrementality test is essentially a split cell test where one cell of your test gets 0 spend and the other gets whatever you're spending. I don't remember if we did that or a geo-based test. It's been 4 or 5 years, but in essence, it wasn't that hard to set up. It was a very classic A/B test. We didn't have to spend too much time, analyzing the results, asking if this is valid. Like we also because we were such big spenders too, we also had Facebook's data science team work with us to validate the result, which I
Okay.
don't think they were super happy with. But yeah, like this is again a very standard. Um, I think you can set it up just on Facebook. It's just an
Mm.
A/B test.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that had to do with like Uber's brand presence already at that time. Like you said, right? Like are ads really driving people to like book another ride if like they kind of already know Uber? Like really it's about their personal need and the timing that they're in right now. And so I think that like the brand probably played a big role in that. But a lot of the folks listening right now, like they don't work for an Uber, they don't work for a company that has this like global presence. I myself has never worked for an Uber. Like my closest comparative would be like my short stint at WordPress.com, and it was really the only time where I never had to worry about sample sizes for experimentation. It's the first time I had a data science team to support us on like experimentation design. I don't remember the exact numbers, but like we had crazy traffic and crazy signups. And most of that was like people being confused between WordPress and WordPress.com. That's another story. But I'm sure like you had crazy volumes of data at Uber as well, obviously. But that's not the case, like I said, for 90% of the companies and most of the folks listening right now. So this idea of incrementality and running experiments, it's the gold standard. It's the best way to prove what is driving revenue and what isn't. But it's a bit of a privilege too, right? Like not everyone has the capacity or the ability to do that. What should you do when you're dealing with tiny sample sizes? Like a lot of our listeners are B2B. Like, do you still need to measure ROI for everything that you're kind of do? Like, what's your advice for like earlier stage founders that don't have that volume?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I know the gold standard is a true A/B test, but to me, incrementality is more the mindset of, hey, we just want to validate and justify, right? Like, just a lot of these companies will also at one point will have MMMs, and like you can't just trust what MMM says. You also have to validate it with some sort of test design. So what I would say is there's two things. Like a lot of data scientists will shit on pre-post. Pre-post does have a really good use case, not only in data science but in life. I mean, an examples thousands of years ago, you would come up on something and you would be like, all right, well, let me try this. How do I feel before and after? Right?
Hmm.
You can isolate things to pre-post if you isolate it to a very specific one thing and make sure that the variable that's changing is just one thing, right? It's a different versus if I were at Uber and I had turned off Facebook without an A/B test and then said, okay, well, all of the drop is 100% correlated to this spend drop. Well, I could say that, but my confidence level is going to be super low, right? Because we had crazy seasonality. Uber is a very seasonal business, right? We, and sometimes in months, our CEO would say something and our stock would just plummet or go up, right? Like there's a lot of brand things, there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of regulation. Like the problem was that you couldn't isolate it. Now, if you're a company and you're saying, listen, I'm going to keep everything else flat. I'm not going to, I don't have a huge product release that could change my numbers. You can do pre-post, right? And actually I had someone on my podcast who is at a huge marketplace, is at Fair, and he gave an example where they were doing a branded search test in France with pre-post, but they isolated it to a specific keyword in branded search in a specific region, isolating. I mean, you're essentially going to be able to know that that is the true cause, right? Especially if you see a large drop, it's not because there's all these confluence of factors all at once. It's because of that one thing. So isolate one thing. And the second thing is, if you are a early stage company with small sample sizes, in my mind, you should be aiming for home runs. And home runs can be picked up with small sample sizes, right? If you've got an MDE of 30, 40%, those are rare, but at that stage, that's kind of what you're trying to hit for. You're not trying to do these micro optimizations. And so it's a bit of a strategic lever too, to aim for things that you can measure with small sample sizes, because that is the sort of, whether it's a new ICP, new copy on the website, and copy, I mean like a fundamental rechanging of your value props, not just like a little tweak. These things do show up with small sample sizes. So it's a bit more about having the discipline to control everything, go into the test saying, okay, we're just isolating these factors, we're just making this one change. Here's how we've addressed and thought about how it could be impacted by other things, but we're fairly confident, right? At the end of the day, A/B test is just about confidence. Pre-post is a less confident, A/B test is more confident. So you just have to essentially gauge that confidence to risk level.
Yeah, I love the point about the big bets. Like when you're smaller, like you are less obsessed about changing the color on this button on your homepage or changing the H1. Like redo the whole landing page, redo the whole homepage, like launch a new part of your product, or completely remove in the 50-50 test, like book a free trial versus like see an ungated, like pre-recorded version of your demo. Like those are the bigger tests that should have higher minimal detectable effects, where you need less like large volumes to say with 95% confidence that like, yeah, this version was better. Like in this case, you're shooting for much better differences, and that detection doesn't have to, require that large sample size. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, perfect. And I can just give another example at that travel tech startup that you mentioned that I was at. We must have had only like 1 or 200 signups a week. And we ran an A/B test where we changed like a big part of our onboarding flow and saw a 40% drop. And like, it is very obvious what happened, right? But I pushed for that A/B test because I didn't want to then have to deal with the CEO after discussing what happened. Like, it's just easier, even if it's like a poorly powered A/B test, you can still then take, again, it's about risk. And I was like, I'm willing to take the risk with 100 people because I'll see if something massive drops. If it doesn't, and right, like if it's saying, hey, like, with 60% confidence this thing worked or not, you're going to roll it out anyway. So go ahead and roll it out. But at least now I caught the back end, which is, it was a 30, 40% drop with like 95% confidence. That's the stuff I'm trying to protect against, less so, trying to be super like rigorous about A/B testing.
You use the word A/B testing a few times in there, and incrementality as well. And I saw some person like post this in one of the comments on your post on LinkedIn too, and I actually had a similar thought. So I wanted to like unpack this, and maybe this is just a nomenclature thing and it's not a big deal, but I'm curious to get your take on this. Like, as I understand it, incrementality tests means having a holdout group or like a control group that doesn't get exposed to the campaign. But an A/B test compares 2 or more variations, typically of like smaller variables, to determine which variable performs better. So like, one of them is to validate causality or like prove the overall impact of a campaign or something. And it's asking fundamental questions like, are ads even working at all? Like your big test at Uber. The other, the A/B test one, is focused more on like comparative optimization, like fine tuning your campaign creative is typically like an A/B test. But I've seen, like you just said too, like use both terms interchangeably a little bit, like saying that an incrementality test is an A/B test where one of the variations is just the holdout group. Instead of getting a different version of the creative, they're just not getting that creative at all. Do you think that incrementality tests are under the umbrella of A/B tests and that the definition of an A/B test is not variations of only small variables? Curious your take there.
Um, yeah, I definitely fall into the camp of the conceptual understanding that I have of an A/B test is one group gets one thing and the other group gets another thing. It's two different experiences, because if you look at the statistical test that you're then running on an incrementality test versus an A/B test, for me, they've always been the same, right? Whether you go with the Bayesian approach or you go with, frequent like whatever you're using, it's still the same comparison, right? You're just comparing, and the test itself, the statistical test, doesn't know that in an incrementality test, one person is getting nothing. It just knows there's two groups and measuring their differences. So to me, they're the same. I would argue that incrementality test has this understanding that there's a holdout group.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also do incrementality test on $100 to spend versus $200 to spend, right? There's an incrementality to that level of spending. So now you're testing the incrementality of that marginal spend level. So an incrementality test, again, it's just how you have to be clear on what you're testing. It generally is understood that you're testing the channel effectiveness and the channel incrementality. But I have seen and heard of like, hey, we're doing an incrementality test on, 1x spend versus 2x spend. So I we tend to complicate things for what I don't believe are necessary reasons. Like, it's just A versus B. A can be whatever you want it to be. B can be whatever you want it to be. And in fact, you can throw a C in there too. I've done an incrementality test where I've done 0 spend, 1x spend, and 2x spend. Right? And so we're budget neutral, which is kind of cool. But you can test these where we are in the curve. Because we're like, well, I mean, while we're at it, if we're going to do an incrementality test and go 1x, we don't want to give that budget back. Let's just 2x the spend and see where we are in the curve. So,
Very cool.
Yeah, that to me is, again, it's an ABC test, but it's also an incrementality test. So, yes, the broad umbrella is A/B test, and then incrementality is a part of that.
I want to ask you about multi-touch attribution. I know that, like you said, while you were at Uber, your team built a custom multi-touch attribution model, typically the case for bigger companies with data science teams. You're not using a third party all the time or just relying on a third party for this stuff. You're building a custom model. But you said it was part of more of a robust measurement strategy. In your post about the 5 ways that you measure marketing ROI, which is also one of my favorite posts. Interestingly, you don't include MTA at all in that post, like in 5 ways to measure marketing ROI. Why did you intentionally leave out MTA as a way to measure marketing ROI? Do you think that, I think you'll agree that it's like far from a perfect methodology, obviously, but it's still probably more useful, arguably, than pre-post or like baseline analysis, like some folks call it, like, which is a method that you do have in that post. So why do you have a grudge against MTA? Why is it not in that post?
No, I don't have a grudge. I think of the 5 methods that I talk about in that post as actually like a way to test an A/B. I mean, way to measure an A/B test. And again, there's an assumption that an A/B test has to be measured by, like a frequentist or a Bayesian approach. Like pre-post in a way is an A/B, right? It's, and if you get very like annoying about it, like A was before, B is after, and I'm comparing A versus B, right? Like it's so that was a way for me to also plot different ways of measuring ROI impact on a scale of like more accurate to less accurate, and like difficulty in terms of setting it up. And so if you look at all those 5 methodologies that I talk about, they are almost for like a campaign, right? It's like you use pre-post for a campaign, diff and diff for a campaign, um, causal inference for a campaign, A/B testing for a campaign. Right? These are all campaign specific. MTA and MMMs are just holistic marketing ROI measurement tools, right? It's telling you cross-channel how is your or what is the the modeled ROI of what you're spending. So it's not a way to measure ROI of a campaign necessarily. We have used it before. It's actually a pretty cool tool, or at least MMM is. I haven't used MTA as much, but MMM is an interesting tool even for campaign measurement. But again, MMM and MTA are more holistic measurement tools, less campaign. And that particular blog post was about campaign measurement.
Gotcha. Fair enough. One thing that you also said in that that AMA that you did on LinkedIn, which is actually how I discovered you and how we started chatting. You mentioned that at Uber you didn't use different attribution models for different channels. Some experts that I've had on the show actually kind of had this consensus that each channel needs its own attribution method to account for its unique role in the customer journey, because like you can't track everything for different channels. So do you think it's fair that for startups maybe or smaller teams, channel specific methods would require its own attribution method for that channel, but as you scale and you manage multiple channels, this more unified approach that you had at Uber becomes more practical? Curious your take there.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think throughout our chat today, there's going to be a theme of, startups versus bigger companies. So the idea of having attribution for individual channels, to me, intuitively does not make sense because it causes overlap. And the whole point of attribution, right or wrong, and I'll use last click attribution as the best example, it's basically like a MECE framework. It's supposed to be mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. That's the whole point of attribution. If you're saying, well, it's actually first touch for this channel, last touch for that channel, by definition, I could have something that's last touch on this channel also be first touch on that channel, which breaks the whole idea of attribution. Now, attribution also doesn't mean we all know that's not right? Like there's more to attribution than just what the numbers say. But the framework that you use, to me, is designed to attribute. And if you don't attribute everything and you've got this like weird in-between attribution, then like you kind of, I candidly am not even sure what the purpose of then having multiple attributions per channel is, because attribution is also designed from like a practitioner's perspective for reporting, for forecasting, things like that. And if you've got this weird hybrid model that doesn't capture everything, but also maybe even double counting, then like that trust breaks. And I would rather, like, one of the things we said at Uber, which I love and I still say, is last click attribution is wrong, but it is consistently wrong. And you can take advantage of that consistency, and you can take advantage of the fact that Google is always going to be over-indexed. Obviously, anything non-digital is going to be virtually zero or show up in organic. But you can take advantage of that. You can track that over time. And so when you introduce a new channel, right, in this idea where you have multiple attribution per channel, like in last click, something will break or something will change, and that's a good thing. Right, you'll see it go away from another channel. It should. The same channels shouldn't have the same impact. And so, that's why we were big on keeping one attribution approach, which was we kept last click, and we had MTA, and we had MMM, and we had incrementality testing, because you're supposed to triangulate across multiple signals. Marketing is way too complex, and humans are way too complex to just have one thing.
In your post about the 5 ways to measure marketing ROI, you explain and talk about causal inference with propensity matching. This is a really cool breakdown, how you kind of put it in a lot of your newsletters. You put most of this complex stuff into layman terms for your average marketer to kind of understand, but you're You break down the detailed method of causal inference and propensity matching, which, in the way that you explain it, mimics A/B testing by comparing similar groups to estimate causal effects. And the example case that you use is when Uber launched Uber One. Like, you don't always want to do a big test for like rollouts like this, like product experiences or like new big features within the product, right? So, how do you select the right variables for this matching, like especially with complex behaviors like loyalty programs like Uber One was? And like maybe touch on how do you ensure non-technical stakeholders will then understand the results of the methodology that you put together. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, so I'll start with your second question and then make sure I get to the first part of it. The propensity, I mean, when you're explaining propensity matching, virtually what you have to do is say, hey, stakeholder, I'm on your side, but we neither of us, like neither the data science team or the marketing team wants to just do a controlled rollout because it's in the Uber's case, it was actually going to affect network effects, right? So there's
Right.
actually some bad stuff there, but you go to them and you say, this is the only way we can prove the ROI of our program and understand its value. So you approach it from the perspective of, this is us working with you to find a way around the fact that we can't A/B test. And what we're doing is, instead of comparing, people just randomly who bought versus who didn't, which are inevitably going to be biased, we're going to be comparing people that bought to people that look like they should have bought but didn't, whatever reason they didn't, right? And so, so you're trying to compare apples to apples instead of what would have been apples to oranges if you can't A/B test. So that's how I explain it. And obviously every marketer is like, great, sounds like we have a chance of proving this is impactful, so go ahead. And there's no risk of like hold back, which
Right.
marketers hate, right?
Mhm.
Marketers hate holding back. So propensity matching overcomes that. And then from the variable selection, first party is always best because one, it's first party data, because it's one, cleaner, but two, it represents the actions of what a customer is doing, right? Like, we could have gone down the rabbit hole of trying to get demographic data, but one, that's expensive. Two, then you have to do matching on that demographic data. And also, like with a lot of privacy stuff, it gets very complex very quick.
Yeah.
When you start with first party data, you might not know stuff like age, gender, race, but you do know behaviors. And at the end of the day, what you're trying to do are influence behaviors. And so having variables like, what day of week do they ride the most? What time of day? What car type, right? Were they Uber Black? Were they Uber X? Are they Uber Pool? Where do they live, right? Because we had this beautiful ability to know every single city center in the country and, well, in the world too. We could say city center, so urban versus suburban. All of a sudden, you've got all this information about them. How long have they been on the platform, right? All this first party data that all of a sudden you're like, I've got a pretty solid, comprehensive understanding of what they're doing. Even stuff like, where they're going. So people that are commuting, I lived in DC for a long time. So people are commuting to the White House area during rush hour are probably government employees. You can start to put personas around these things. And so first party data is where you should always start.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually a lot richer than people give it credit for. It might not have the demographic data that people associate with segmentation, but behavioral segmentation is just as rich and oftentimes more accurate because you don't have to do the matching.
This episode was brought to you by our friends at Census. You probably have over 15 tools in your marketing tech stack, but how many of them have the full picture of your customer's journey? Census acts as the universal data layer in your stack. It unifies and cleans data from all your sources and makes it available for any app and AI agent to use. Census makes it super easy to unify and standardize customer data, then enrich and enhance it, like running deduplication, cleaning, scoring, and routing workflows, and then sync and activate that data across all of your tools so you can actually do something with it. As a former customer and power user myself, I honestly wish I had discovered Census way earlier in my career. For marketers and data teams that work together to power big campaigns, it's so refreshing and actually possible to work from a reliable source of truth. Don't just take my word for it though, since this is loved by marketing and data teams at awesome companies like HubSpot, Perplexity, Canva, Clay, Notion, Activision, and many more. Check them out at getcensus.com and tell them we sent you. Yeah, it's a super cool way of thinking about it. I think the whole like propensity, predictive modeling side of marketing, especially sitting on top of first party data, is like almost an area where not just enterprise teams, but like teams that invest in that like data support for marketing have access to. Like most of the startups I chat with, like advise a small number of teams, like this idea of propensity modeling, like it's just not a thing. Like it's like a few far out future based thing. Even if there is like one data engineer or like a data team, like they're stuck like building tables and like using reverse CTL to share that data out. And all the CEO doesn't like this tool, so you're stuck like pushing that into like a Google Studio so that they have access to like they're not like focusing on building cool shit like they would probably think that propensity modeling is. But I wanted to ask you about predictive modeling. Like you mentioned that the modeling your team did at Uber was built to predict things like churn, lifetime value. You mentioned a couple other ones in there. And it was really effective in the short term, but less so in long term predictions. Given like obviously Uber's fast changing nature of the business, you mentioned a ton of seasonality. Did you find that like building flexibility into the models was a requirement, or was it more like frequently like rebuilding them from scratch? Like how did you account for that like long term like lack of accuracy for things like churn and LTV?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we took the approach of we know long term. I mean, especially at Uber, right? We were the fastest growing company for almost a decade. So there was just a pace of change that we could not keep up with. Then you introduce products every few years, and then so it was more from like a sanity perspective, but also like if you think about companies like Uber, people go in and out all the time. Like you don't have the luxury of one person sitting there building a model for 10 years. So it's also like you're continuously evolving because the people building the model are evolving and the priorities for the business. So that's one
Mm,
thing. But if you think about how churn and retention work, they're always from a series of short-term actions, right? Like you're only retained because you were activated because you saw value in the product. And you only took the second trip because you took the first trip, and you only took the third trip because but like you could tell very quickly if I had a driver, tell me he's going to be there and he or she's going to be there in 10 minutes and it takes 20 minutes, and then my price ends up being 3x what I said it was going to be. There's a lot of variables very quickly.
mhm,
We could easily understand would cause churn. So you didn't have to predict long-term churn because churn is inevitably a short-term thing. Like people don't remember like, oh, I've been burned 100 times. They're like, I've been burned twice. I'm done with this company, right? So you don't have to actually model churn out for that long. And same thing with retention. People are like, I loved my last experience. It actually made up for the experience before that. And all of a sudden, you get this retention. So you didn't have to build retention models. And so that was part of the challenge, though, right? Is everyone talks about LTV curves. I mean, if anyone is measuring LTV more than like a year and a half, 2 years, I automatically just be like,
mm,
you're wrong. Like, just don't
mm,
even bother doing that unless you're a Nike. But then you have something like the pandemic. Then what do you do? All of your models get thrown out, and then you rebuild everything, right? So you've got 8-year economic cycles. There's just so much. It's not worth doing anything more than a year or two. And so all these factors made it so that um you didn't have to build for that long. And so what we actually did for even predicting LTV is you could tell very quickly the LTV of a customer based on what they did in their first week. And so all you had to do is build a predictive LTV model of like 1 week behavior to like model 2-year behavior for like previous cohorts. But then again, if you want a 2-year LTV, that means you have to wait 2 years to even calculate LTV. So all these
right.
things, it ends up being an exercise of how shortly in time can you get a signal to calculate LTV. So it ends up being like a predictive LTV of like 3-month LTV, 6-month LTV, knowing that, the ratios between 6 months and 2 years you monitor and hope they stay the same over time. And that's how you do it. So at the end of the day, it all comes down to like months.
Very cool. I know that part of your team's role at Uber, at some point anyways, was to tie lifts in brand awareness to bottom of the funnel metrics and revenue. Obviously, and I think you said this in one of your posts too, like you can't use MTA for a national TV campaign. You're missing like way too many offline touches. You can't use incrementality for a national TV campaign either. It's an opportunity to create a control group in a national TV campaign. But you say that you can use incrementality for anything except a national TV campaign. What do you mean by that? And maybe also touch on like what did that process look like for like longer term horizon experiments for brand?
Yeah. So this was really fun because I built Uber's brand data science team. And so we were a team where I was on the performance. So Uber did this weird thing where they split up performance marketing and brand marketing. So there's a VP of brand and a VP of performance.
Okay.
I was the first time where I sort of like crossed this line. So I
Mhm.
reported to the VP of performance, but exclusively worked with people under the VP of brand. And I'm so glad I did because it's like such an eye opener to be on the brand side of things. It's
Mm.
such a different world, and I love it. It's actually like something I'm super passionate about now is getting more people to understand that side. But not to go on a tangent, but when you're measuring brand, right? Like the problem is with national, you obviously can't measure when there's a national TV ad because there's exposure everywhere. And so what we were trying to do was understand, okay, maybe not a national, but there are campaigns where you're trying to understand, one, the first thing is, does your campaign even move the metric it's supposed to? You'd be surprised how many companies don't even have that answer, right? They just roll out a brand campaign or any marketing and they're like, we think it's working.
Mhm.
So the first part of the methodology was to even understand, okay, is awareness moving? And then what you do is first, once you get awareness to move consistently and you can predictably move it because your creative is good enough, you've got good customer insights, then you set up again, you have to set them up as geolifts generally because brand campaigns are usually multi-channel, omni-channel campaigns. And you hold out a certain part of your geo and you run all of your brand ad on, not on that, and then you run it on the other part.
Okay.
And you measure impact over not 8 weeks, but your minimum is 12 weeks. And so these are 12 to often 3 to 6 month tests that you just have to get going. But it starts with this idea of you have to have trust that if you move the metric that you're meant to move, it will move the bottom impact. Like it doesn't really make a lot of sense where like if you have an increase in awareness by 20 points, you're not going to get more sessions. Like why? Like where that disconnect, I think it rarely happens. And so we were trying to do that step by step by saying, listen, we think if we move awareness, it'll transit to sessions. If we can move consideration, then you start to see requests. If you start to see whatever the next stage of the funnel is, you're going to see business impact. If you do it consistently over time, we also saw that if you ran a brand test and then turned it off, we would measure the post effect and the brand value would just drop.
Mhm.
So like that's the kind of stuff where we would go and be like, you can't do these 2-month brand activations. They don't work. They're a waste of money. Like you have to be always on. And that influenced a lot of the strategy to be always on. Which brand marketers love because they're like, great, finally, we've been saying this for a while. And we loved because we're like, this is a very cool, thing that we're measuring and working on. So like, there's a really cool, like happy marriage eventually. In the beginning it was a little rough because you're telling people that don't want to A/B test or test that you have to do a holdout. But eventually you get to the synergy of we're all trying to prove ROI and oh, wow, we're proving it for the first time. So like we all collectively want more budget.
Do you think it's ever okay to like not measure something? Like the national TV ad example that we just used, like how do we even tackle that? Like, can we agree that campaigns like that are cross country, that don't come with a click, that is not something that you can put a UTM on, will never have proof of ROI? Like, how do you handle execs asking you to measure things that can't be measured? Is it just like a long form conversation and it's a change management approach? Like, how do you have that conversation of the trade offs between we won't be able to measure this, but it should have brand impact?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And I'll start with the worst scenario is a marketing leader being surprised that there's no measurement.
Mm,
That is the absolute worst scenario, right? Because all of a sudden, it literally like these things happen. It's like, hey, like our CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company was like, hey, we just spent this much. What happened? What's the proof? And for the CMO to go, oh, I thought we were going to measure it. Oh, like that is just, that sucks. So part of the conversation is education around, let's go into it agreeing we can't measure and then don't
mm,
ask for measurement later.
yeah.
Like, it's totally okay, to your first question. It's totally okay to not measure things. It's not okay to expect data science to come up with stuff because you forgot to have that conversation. That's on you. And I was pretty like, at some point you have to be careful, right? But we were pretty strict about saying like, listen, we're telling you months in advance or weeks in advance, we can't measure this. We're not going to make stuff up. And like you kind of, I mean, this is not a great way to phrase it, but you kind of need to let marketers get burnt a little.
Mm,
And then you'll find that they come back and they want that conversation, and then you get brought into planning meetings and prioritization meetings. And so yeah, it is a bit of change management. My style is like, hey, I want to help you as much as I can, but at some point we're all adults. You're gonna have to learn the hard way. Um, I don't like that it gets to that point, but that's oftentimes the point does get to. But that's what the conversation needs to be around is education around, okay, what is our measurement strategy? Okay, if you want to do a geotest and you're not going to be able to invest as much budget as you thought, and then it's like, no, we really want to invest in this budget, we're behind targets. Okay, then we can't measure it, right? And it's this trade-off, and like you try the best you can, and sometimes we would say, okay, what region, what's been going on, in some of the smaller markets that don't give as much love, there aren't as many product changes, there aren't as many things going on, you can do pre-post,
mhm.
you can try to help them with that. But it's just, again, under like being very upfront with level of risk, level of confidence, and making sure that no one is surprised by the level of confidence and level of risk.
Yeah, great answer. Why do you think it is that marketing needs to prove their impact for everything that they do? Like at Uber, you led a team of data scientists who were focused on building measurement methodologies to prove the ROI of marketing. Sometimes it was brands, sometimes it was performance. Did Uber also have a team of data scientists dedicated to proving the ROI of the finance team or the HR team? Like, obviously, I think the answer here is like, marketing has advertising spends. And for a lot of companies that are big, like there should be measurements as much as possible. But marketing is way more than just paid media. Like
Mm-hmm.
finance doesn't have to report on campaign ROI or streamlining payroll, and HR doesn't justify the headcount for like with revenue attribution models. Like, why should marketing strategy, operations, creative be under this microscope of ROI when we all know that, or at least most of us know that building a brand and refining a Martech stack or creating a customer journey, like they're not clear dollar to dollar payback. It's not a direct response thing, but we still get asked all the time, what's the ROI of this going to be? Like what drove the most revenue last month? And we don't like other teams skate by with metrics like employee satisfaction or process efficiency metrics. Like if product teams can claim credit for long-term innovation with no immediate ROI, why can't marketing do the same for brand?
Yeah. Oh, a lot to unpack there. So I think this sentiment and way of working feels like it's in the last decade. I think if
Hmm.
you look at like early 90s and even before, like marketing was king. and people understood the importance of marketing. I mean, I think that's why you have the best marketers in the world now, got their marketing chops in the 80s, 90s at brands like any of the CPGs, Coca-Cola's, Pepsi's, like they're just so good at marketing and storytelling. It's amazing because they had to, because you were selling a commoditized product. And so I think for the first time in tech, you've got this non-commoditized product. And to be fair, I think product is always asked to prove its ROI. I don't know many product teams that get away with, yeah, we haven't shipped anything or moved the needle. So product was, the past 10 years has been asked to do that. And they've been able to do that very well, right? If you start at like companies like a Facebook or any of the big tech companies, like they've been data driven, experimental, like from like day one. Like Facebook's growth team is legendary. And so they did a really good job of saying, hey, look, we're able to prove our efforts and we know these things move the needle. And I don't think they were putting it back on marketing, but I think there is a bit of a rivalry, right? Like marketing getting $1 means product is not getting $1. And so there's a bit of, and I don't think product intentionally means to do this, but they're just able to be better at proving their ROI because a lot of it is first party. They can A/B test, etc. Versus marketing, there's been this like influx of performance marketing that became so, and like people loved it for the past 10, 15 years. They love that they can measure every single thing and every single click. And UTM is only a thing of the past, 10, 15 years, right? So like, so performance marketing also then did it to itself. And then, and then you have these people trained to say, well, performance marketing can do it. Why can't brand? So you've got this like weird disconnect of people just forgot that brand. And sorry, the last thing is brand never had to prove its ROI. So you have a bunch of people that have never been asked to prove ROI, then competing against both product and performance marketing who have gotten really good at proving their ROI, or at least perception wise. I don't think performance marketers are actually that great. But you have these two teams and then they just forgot and they don't know how. So, right. So you're now starting to see these tech companies catch up on brand data science. And now you've got these PhDs in econometrics, people coming in to try to prove the value. And everyone that is investing in brand is seeing positive ROI, right? And they're able to prove it. And so I think you'll start to see a bit more case studies and you'll start to see a bit more papers around measuring the impact of brand. But like you have this weird perfect storm over 10, 15 years where, you didn't have to, they didn't have to before, they don't know how to. And then, their rival teams all knew how to and did really well.
I think you said that leadership at Uber were actually the ones that said that since we're spending all this money, let's build a measurement team backed by data science to figure out the ROI of all of this cash that we're throwing into Meta. Like, let's say the tables are flipped though, and like maybe some of the listeners are in those shoes too, and you're advising a company with very little data science resources, and they're focused on marketing, and the measurement game is very thin. How can you make the case to leadership to build this data science team? Or maybe asked differently, like, is there a situation where you advise teams to not waste efforts trying to solve the perfect ROI measurement? Like, what are your thoughts there?
Oh, yeah, I would say like, I don't think I've ever advocated for like perfect ROI measurement because if you're spending that much time measuring, then like you're probably not spending enough time growing. So it's got to be this like balance of like we're growing at breakneck speed, which also I only work with consumer companies, and so most of them, the only way you survive as a consumer company is you're growing like crazy. You can't
Right.
afford to grow slowly. So when you're in that situation, like it's about, again, I'll go back to like communicating what the trade-offs are. So it's like, hey, we'll keep investing in our, in Meta, but I have a hunch that it might not be working as well as we think. So I can either pull back off the gas. It might show up poorly for your Q2 numbers and you got to go to the board and explain that. Or we keep going, but like, it's that conversation. And I think the problem is data scientists are not really great at having that conversation. And so, I don't advocate for companies doing this, because you have to have a data science leader that can sit and go toe to toe with the C-suite and have these conversations. And I find that really lacking. And I think a bit of a tangent here, but like one of the biggest problems is that data analysts and data scientists have been sold that data science is a technical field, and it's not. It is a very human field that happens to be, have technical aspects to it. And so one of the things I encourage data scientists, data analysts to think about is like, you are a marketer first that is really good at data science. You're not a data scientist that is doing marketing. And
very cool.
yeah. And so like, that's the problem, in which case, again, marketing falls into this trap of you don't have great analysts and data scientists that can advocate for the strategic thinking. And so then you have people push. And the last thing I'll add to is, for some reason, everybody thinks they can do marketing. Like a CEO doesn't go, hey, you know what? I don't have a background in finance. I'm just going to go run the cash numbers. I mean, I'll handle reconciliation this month. But every single time they're like, you know what? Marketing's not going well. Let me step in. And every time. And so you've got to have this pushback, and you've got to have people that are able to push back and have this conversation around ROI and the trade-offs. And then on the flip side, actually a good example is I went to this company that I was consulting with, and they had an amazing CRM team, right? Like the best life cycle team I've seen outside of Uber. It was these 5 women that were just killing it. I loved working with them. And they would run these daily deal campaigns. And I was like, why are you running these daily deal campaigns? They're an e-commerce company. And they're like, that's how we've always done it. I'm like, do you know if they're incremental? Like, do you know any, and so they're like, no. And I was like, and they're like, how do we even do that? So I was like, okay, so let's run for a couple weeks. A third of the group gets 0, a third of the group gets 4 emails a week, and a third of the group gets 7. And what we were able to prove is that the 4 and the 7 definitely have positive impact. So yay, you're incremental. Already like a huge thing for you to know that the work you're doing is valuable. But the 7 is not more valuable than the 4. In fact, you're getting more unsubscribes, same revenue, so no, difference. And so now you can cut your workload by like a huge chunk. 3/7 of your workload just gets taken away because you don't have to keep pushing these pins out. Why they were never able to have that conversation with the CEO, I don't know. I generally get the dynamic, and I know it's not easy. It's also easy for me to come in as an advisor to have that conversation. But these are the trade-offs that actually prevent teams from bringing in data science and ROI measurement at the right time. It's almost never technical. You could give me any set of resources and circumstances, and I could find a way to prove some part of your ROI. But it's the weakest part of most marketing data stacks are the people.
There's so many awesome things in your answer there. Like one of my favorites was like, tell your advice to tell data scientists that at least work on marketing stuff, that you need to figure out a way to be a marketer first, and then have your data analyst or your data scientist hat on after. Like the technical components come after you understand what the hell the marketer is trying to do. What are the use cases? What are the strategies? And I think that's like way easier said than done. I have a lot of friends in data science and data engineering, and they just hate marketing. Like they're allergic to it. They love product. Like put me on any product situation, like user experience, like UI design, like I don't care what it is as long as it's the product, it's technical. Like I love working on code stuff, right? But like throw me on the marketing team and I have to help like a rev ops person or sales something, or just like work on the website. Like it's just not as exciting for a lot of technical folks. How do you make that case that, hey, marketing is actually fun? Like we chatted before this and you're like, marketer first, you think of a marketer before you think of the technical stuff. Like, how do you make that transition? How do you find those technical people that are willing to do that? Because it's not the case, at least in my experience.
Yeah. It's an innate thing, Phil. Like, I think like I didn't love marketing, I loved Uber. And
Mm,
so I was willing to really understand marketing
okay.
because at the end of the day, and this is a challenge that I've had candidly since I've left Uber, is to find another company that I'm that passionate about, right? So part of it was also I was at a cultural moment at a company that, once in a lifetime opportunity. So I get that, right? Not everybody's in the same situation where they're that motivated. But I would say you've got to be motivated by something. Either you're passionate about your own success, in which it behooves you to understand product and your customer and marketing better, or you're passionate about the people you work with, in which case it's better for you to understand what they're doing, or you're obsessed about the company, in which case it's better, right? Like there's no
Mhm.
situation in which case it's not better to deeply understand marketing or whatever you're working on, even if you're a product, right? If you look at product and go, I'm only interested in the UX and the technical component, you've defeated the whole purpose of the product is there in service of the customer. And so there are people that are innately customer obsessed and
Mhm.
truly like I like mean that in like, what it's meant to be, not just like a buzzword. And then you can put them in any situation. In fact, like I don't know if you experience this when you're at WordPress, but like there's a lot of these people that can just jump ship from like one problem to another across any team, and they always thrive. And it's not because they're that good, it's because they're that curious.
Mhm.
And curiosity, I think, is it's something that's hard to test for in an interview, but if you
Yeah.
could, it is almost the best predictor. And so it goes back to curiosity is what I think made me interested. Like I would, on my drives, I would take an Uber home every night.
Mhm.
One, because we got free credits, but every single night I'd be like, hey, to the driver, like, what do you like? What do you not like? And I would tell them I work for
Mhm.
Uber, right? And I would tell them like, listen, I'm trying to help you out. And a good example of this is I talked to a driver and he was like, hey man, like this is like my second day, but like Uber told me to drive on like Friday nights. It was super stressful. And so I went and looked at the data, and driver retention was like a significantly lower number if your first trip was during like a rush hour.
Mhm.
And our marketing comms would push you towards that
Hmm.
because from our side, it's a business thing. That's like,
Right.
you want more drivers during the time. And
Mhm.
I was like, hey, like, I think we should test this. Like, instead of pushing for Friday night, let's do like Saturday afternoon, where it's a lot more calm. Like, go do your first and like, it was like 1 or 2 percentage points, which for retention is massive, and
Yeah, very cool.
for supply side retention. And it comes down to this curiosity. So people that are like, in places where like they're not excited, well, find a place that you're curious about what the product is doing. You're going to be infinitely happier when you like the product and you like the people you work with. It's just human nature. So you've got to find a way to feed that curiosity.
So cool. Such a great answer. Yeah, curiosity is something that comes up a lot on the show when we're talking about hiring and like who is good and marketing operations and marketing technology. But it's really cool to hear your answer and how that translates to not just marketing, like folks that are curious across different business teams do really well because they care deeply about the customer. Yeah, it's a super cool answer. This has been super fun, Sundar. I feel like we could keep chatting for probably a couple more hours there. I'm pumped for your upcoming podcast. By the time this drops, you're probably going to be releasing it shortly. I'm excited to get more of that B2C side of marketing. B2B's been more of my jam, but um, I got one last question for you. You're a data practitioner, marketing advisor, you're a writer, upcoming podcaster. You're also a husband, father, a well-traveled home chef, as well as an amateur chess master. One question we ask everyone on the show is, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? How do you find balance between all the stuff you're working on while staying happy?
Yeah, and I know we had briefly talked about this before, but over the past couple years, so March and April, we had some personal stuff happen to us, and it really puts stuff into perspective. Um, you know, 3 deaths in 3 weeks, and one was 99, one was like 67, and one was 33. So like,
Mm,
just like a real like eye opener on life. And I think for me, one thing I've been very big on is like really not trying to manage stress, but just preventing it. So before you
Mm.
get to the point of managing it, like I just try to like not even get there. And it's an easier thing to say than do, but like my philosophy has always been, you can control things and you can control things. Things you can control, if you do your best effort and you try your best, that's okay. And if you can't control it, then like you have to figure out a way to not get stressed about it, right? It's the things that you can't control that always get people. And for me,
Yeah.
I've just built up, I think, like some resilience towards that. And that's kept me happy because, I would say like many things, like short term, there's going to be fluctuations. It's impossible to always be happy, but like you've got to look at a long term trend, right? And if you think about it like stocks, like you're going to take some losses in the short term, but like if you've got this long term perspective on how you want to invest in yourself and the relationships that you want to invest in, like if you do that right repeatedly every day as much as you can, in the long term, you're going to be happy. And so an example for us is, we left our families and we came to Amsterdam, and we're not looking back. Like it's unlocked a level of happiness that if we had thought too much about it, we would have never even gotten to and reached. So for me, it's just, trying to put myself into situations and see where my energy takes me. And then being comfortable revisiting some assumptions. Like, for example, like I grew up in an Indian household, and work and career were always the number one thing. And I'm very comfortable accepting, and like, I will never put work first. Like I did at a certain point in my life. I've now got, my wife and my kid, and like, it's like pretty clear difference between how much I care about them and how much I care about work.
Mm.
It doesn't mean I'm going to be bad at my job or crappy, or like, it just means like I've been very ironclad on like my priorities, and like we've talked about, like what brings me energy. And if it doesn't bring me energy, like again, like with the stuff that happened in March, like it's not that life is too short. It's just life is just too unpredictable that like I'm not going to chase stuff that doesn't give me energy.
Mm.
And there's no point in just sitting there being like unhappy, because it bleeds into every part of your life and it makes you just like a miserable person. So yeah. So long answer, apologies. But
No, it's a super profound, powerful answer. Really appreciate it.
yeah,
My first thought that popped into my head when you're like, we left our family, moved to Amsterdam. I cannot imagine raising a small child without like the grandparents living close by and helping out when they're sick from daycare or just like giving us breaks here and there. Like how are you guys doing that without grandparents nearby?
yeah. Well, since we've had the kid, I've been on this solopreneur journey, so I've had a bit more flexibility. But also,
Nice,
this is
nice.
like what I mean by we found this new level of happiness. Like we're in a system that lets you have that work-life balance. Like there's no part of me that, or my wife, she's been in a full-time job, super stressful, super high up position. They're very understanding, right? So if the kid can't go to daycare, there's not a question of like, oh man, should I tell them? Should I take a sick
Yeah,
day? Like
yeah.
you're in an ecosystem that I think just puts families and people first. And so we won't get into my thoughts on the US, even though it's where I'm from. But we're in an environment where people get it. And we've actually like found that like, we would love our grandparents to be around, because we want them to have a good relationship with our kids. But we haven't like felt the need like we're like struggling without them. And I we know a lot of expat couples here, and they're kind of the same thing, because like you're just not in this daily grind where you feel like you need grandparents sometimes to help you out. Like you can, it's luckily for us, our kid has also just been great. So I think there's a little bit of luck at the draw there. He's a good kid. So yeah,
Awesome. I really
yeah,
appreciate your time, Sundar. It's been super fun.
yeah.
I'll link out to the newsletter, and I'll be sure to help support the launch on the podcast. Excited to follow on that journey there. And yeah, let's keep in touch, man. It's been
Yeah,
super fun.
yeah. So this has been awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Phil. And yeah, like you said, let's keep in touch.